Good morning. Welcome to episode 85 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today I'm joined, as I am each Thursday, by the one and only Mia O'Brien of Helmets and Heels. You can catch her there each weekday from 12 to 2 p.m. on 1010XL 92.5 FM radio in Jacksonville. Mia, looks like you got some sunny conditions around you. How's it hanging?
Does it not look photoshopped right now? I'm literally sitting here and I'm like, holy crap, this is not like a green screen. Like this is actually the putting. This is the putting green. This is the warm-up area for the golfers at the Players Championship. But yes, thank you to our friends at Channel 4 for letting us sit under here for today's podcast, because a little damp from the morning dew in some of our other locales here at Palm Valley Village. But if you are going to be out at the Players this week, make sure you stop on by and say hi. 1010XL will have a presence all weekend long.
Absolutely. Excited for the tournament for sure. Shout out to Channel 4 for setting you up with that little area. But today we're going to have a short and sweet show running through each of the 9 free agents that the Jacksonville Jaguars have agreed to terms with. They reportedly agreed to terms with all of them on Monday during the negotiation, i.e. negotiation. What's the other word for it?
Tampering, illegal tampering window. We are now saying, I said it on air, Gus, and it's so true. We are now saying legal negotiating. I'm tired of the legal tampering, because tampering is to suggest you're not allowed to do something. The tampering occurred last week. That's why Kirk Cousins and the Falcons got repercussions for a deal that now is only going to last for 1 year. But I digress. Yes, the legal tampering window officially began Monday at noon. The league year began Wednesday at 4. But my reporting matches what you just noted. All of these free agent signees by the Jaguars, they were courted. They picked the Jaguars on Monday, and they have become Jaguars by Wednesday at 4 o'clock.
Absolutely. And it is, those 9 names were originally reported on Monday, and they became officialized by the team account, by the team website, whatever, yesterday at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. And so we've got 9 names to talk about. Potentially we'll have another name to add if there's any breaking news, but we do have a firm 9, and some of those names, as well as general manager James Gladstone, will be meeting with media later today. Just keep your eye out in terms of content from that. But Mia, you and I are going to just go through each name one by one this morning and give a grade for how we feel about the signee. And so let's start with the very first player who was reported, Jourdan Lewis, the cornerback from the Dallas Cowboys. Would really recommend going to the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube channel to check out the interview that Mike Zimmer did with Coach Campo and everyone on XL Primetime. Mike Zimmer, obviously former NFL head coach, but was the Cowboys' defensive coordinator last year. So he had a lot of good intel on Jourdan Lewis. But Mia, what was kind of like your initial reaction or general reaction and grade for this signing?
Yeah, my initial reaction is also available on the 1010XL Jaguars YouTube channel and the 1010XL social channels. That was flipped because we were live on Helmets and Heels when that deal was initially reported. And our response was, wait a second. He was one of the highest graded nickel corners. He's the highest paid nickel corner in the league. But what about Jarian Jones? Isn't he one of the higher rated nickel corners in the National Football League? The math is not mathing here. And as the days have progressed, and certainly Cam Wolf from the NFL Network reported it yesterday, it sounds like by all accounts, the expectation is that Anthony Campanile is going to say to those two guys, hey, one of you will be the nickel, one of you will be the slot. You may change during the game. Have at it. You both are versatile, and that's what we want in this defensive scheme in Jacksonville. I think what's very interesting for me is that Jourdan Lewis is a guy who, while maybe not Micah Parsons, obviously he's not Micah Parsons, not the headliner, it appears that he was really the straw that stirred the drink when it came to not only on the field for the Dallas defense the last few years, but also in the locker room. He was a guy, and I can report this, that the Cowboys wanted to keep. They got outbid by the Jaguars. The Jaguars did not get outbid by anyone for any of the free agents available, by the way. I want to make sure that that is known. But additionally, they did outbid the Cowboys for one of their own in Jourdan Lewis. And folks in that front office were really, really sad to see him go. And obviously, as he approaches 30, he is 30. Look, yes, you look at that and you're like, well, what are we doing signing a 30-year-old corner when we have one of the better 23-year-old nickel corners in the league? Again, I think so much of it stems from the Jaguars' evaluation in terms of physicality, tackling from the defense a year ago. They needed more sure tacklers. They needed more Swiss Army knives. They need guys who can quite frankly, just get the job done. And Jordan Lewis fulfills that.
Yeah, I think that the fit is really the only question mark, and really less about the fit and just more about the question mark is Jarian Jones. It's do they see, or as you said, they'll probably battle it out for the slot, but there's plenty of questions arising of do they view Jarian more as an outside guy? Do they even view him as a starting caliber cornerback at all? Maybe the new coaching staff is a little bit lower than most people, at least fans in Jacksonville, are.
I think that a big part of it, Gus, and I've said this at nauseum on the Superstation to the point that you're all probably sick of me saying it. Historically speaking, the Los Angeles Rams have placed such an emphasis along their defensive line. And the highest drafted player currently in the Rams secondary is Cam Kitchens, who was the 100th overall draftee in last year's NFL draft. And so that's where I just, quite frankly, I don't think that this is a regime that you're going to see say, we need to go out and get second, first, highest paid in the league outside corners. The fact that they quote unquote broke the bank for Jordan Lewis and it's still a relatively inexpensive contract, and the Jaguars only went from having the 9th most cap space to the 7th most or whatever they moved 2 spots, right? Or 7th to 9th. So that says to me that, look, this is a signing that, well, yes, it does give you another player who can play in the slot, although I think that that's going to be a very vital role in Anthony Campanile's defense. It also was as much of a EQ signing as it was an IQ signing because of the tenacity that Jordan Lewis brings on and off the field.
Yeah. In terms of the contract, it's a 3-year deal for $30 million with $20 million guaranteed. At first, it was a little bit eyebrow raising, especially because it was reported as the best deal for a nickel cornerback in the NFL. But there's a lot of things to consider. The first is that the NFL cap rises each year, but especially this year and next year, pretty much every team has ample cap space and is able to pay players. And I also think that something important to consider is there's kind of an unfamiliarity tax. I think that with a lot of players, you kind of get a familiarity discount. Look at how the Jaguars were able to bring in Hunter Long and Johnny Munt tight ends on pretty cheap contracts. Because they had familiarity with people on Jacksonville's current coaching roster. But then meanwhile, Luke Farrell got a bag relatively from the 49ers because the Niners saw him as a good fit for their system, but there's not really any true familiarity between Luke Farrell and the San Francisco 49ers staff, at least not that one that I know of. And so similarly, I think, as you said, the Jaguars had to outbid the Cowboys. And since they had nobody that was really familiar with Jordan Lewis to be able to kind of convince him, they needed to do it with the dollar amounts. And so, again, I think the contract was a little bit eyebrow raising at first, but now that the dust has settled, I don't really mind it that much. And so I'm giving this a B-, being a little bit conservative, but I do like the signing. What's your grade for Jordan Lewis, Mia?
I actually love that. I think B- is right on the money, leaning more towards a B. But obviously for me, the bigger question that we didn't even bring up yet is that I was also told at the NFL Combine that Darnell Savage, when he first signed with the Jaguars, and granted that was with Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson, his expectation was that he would play more in the slot. And in conversations, it sounds like he's kind of been assured of that by Coach Camps and company. And so I don't know how you're going to fit this many players underneath, but hey, listen, I'm excited to see exactly how he makes it work. So yes, B- for me as well.
All right, let's move on to the next signing, which was quarterback Nick Mullens. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this one because he will be the backup to Trevor Lawrence. The former Vikings quarterback was signed to a 2-year deal worth $6.5 million with $3 million guaranteed. Mia, what do you think about the Mullens contract and signing?
I'm going to make it nice and easy for you. You gave this a B+ on 1010XL.com. And for the sake of timing, I am also giving it a B+. I think that not only is he an upgrade to CJ Beathard and an upgrade slightly to Mac Jones, I think the irony is not lost on me that once upon a time, Nick Mullens and CJ Beathard were in the same quarterback room. And ultimately the San Francisco 49ers felt that Mullens was the more athletic of the two. And so I think that that is proved year over year to be the case, or at the very least in terms of their ability to bounce back from injury. So yes, B+ for me as well. Sorry to my fellow Iowa Hawkeye.
Yeah, I think Mullens actually got his first career start in San Francisco because of an injury to CJ Beathard, and that kind of opened the door.
That's correct.
Mullens actually had
that is correct.
Off the top of my head, it was definitely north of 150 passer rating in his first career start. But he has a career record of 5-13 or something like that. But I do still think that this is a significant upgrade at the backup quarterback spot, which is obviously one of the most crucial backup spots across the whole roster. So yeah, B+. I meant to mention this at the top, but if you want to see my grades, the contract details, And then a little bit of a background on each signee. Go to 1010xl.com/Jaguars.
I'll drop it in the chat, Gross. I'll drop it in the chat for everybody.
1010xl.com/Jaguars is where you can find the link for our live free agency tracker. So yeah, B+ is across the board from Nick Mullens. We like that. It makes a lot of sense. He's got the familiarity with Grant Udinski, who previously coached quarterbacks in Minnesota. So moving on to tight end Johnny Munt, who also comes from the Vikings. He signed a 2-year deal worth $5.5 million with TBD guaranteed. One interesting quote that I saw about Munt was that in 2023, Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell said, "I believe Johnny Munt is the best third tight end in the NFL. The variety of jobs he can do on all three downs, doesn't get enough credit for how he runs or how he blocks for that matter." And so this is your Luke Farrell tight end 3 replacement. What do you think, Mia?
You gave this a C+, and I couldn't disagree more, Gus. For me, this is a solid B, B-, if I'm being completely honest, especially when you consider, and granted, I think when you gave that grade, at that point in time, we did not know how much money Luke Farrell would be getting, which is 3 years over $20 million. Comparatively, for Johnny Munt to get a 2-year deal for $5.5 million, and you couple that with the next name that we'll get to, or one of the next names that we'll get to, in Hunter Long, who also gets 2 years, $5 million. That is 2 tight ends for 2 years, $10.5 million, compared to the other alternative, which is a tight end 3 for 3 years, $20 million. Not only is it a great savings against the cap, and I think it's great value in the words of Trent Baalke, but ultimately Johnny Munt is exactly what this offense demands, which is a true blocking tight end. Yes, he's not going to give you a ton in the passing game in terms of receiving, but that's not the end of the world. I loved this. I'm trying to find the tweet of who it was. Here it is. It's from Andrew Siciliano. Johnny Munt will have a job as long as there are branches on the Sean McVay coaching tree. People in Minnesota love this guy. People in Los Angeles love this guy. High character, again, to your point, someone who certainly the staff here knows. And so I think it's, for me, he was probably, and I don't know this to be true, but he was probably the first name that when Liam Cohen, Grant Udinski, James Gladstone and company sat down, they were like, oh, if we're going to run this scheme, we need to bring in Johnny.
Yeah, I did give it a C+, but that's definitely a good point about Luke Farrell's contract. If he is going to be the third tight end on Jacksonville's roster, I didn't want to go overboard. But yeah, effectively an above average signing for Jacksonville, I think.
Yeah, let's bring in the Hunter Long conversation as well. Let's just hit them both together. You also gave that one a C+. And again, that was prior to Farrell signing the, I guess, splash deal with Shanahan and company. I guess that's what we're going to call it. Hunter Long, coming out of Boston College, was someone I was really high on in the draft process. Again, thought he may have that George Kittle capability of being an inline blocker and then being a receiving threat. Now, certainly when George Kittle was drafted in the 5th round, I was in the minority of people who thought he'd go on to become a perennial All-Pro. And obviously Hunter Long has not gone on to do that. I think he gives you a little bit more in the receiving game than he gets credit for, certainly a little bit more well-traveled compared to Munt, who just follows wherever the McVay-Shanahan tree wants him to go. But I think that these are 2 signings that, in my estimation, and this is why I wanted to do both of them together, I give them both a B-, B. And the reason I do so is because I don't think the Jaguars are done. I firmly believe, knowing this is one of the deepest tight end classes we've ever seen in the NFL draft, I don't think they go Tyler Warren at 5, but I do think you will see the Jacksonville Jaguars find a tight end probably in the top of the 4th round. If you ask me, I think that's going to be the sweet spot. They're going to find that tight end who is going to be the number 2 in that room eventually, if not year 1, and be a potential receiving threat behind Brenton Strange, who obviously now becomes tight end number 1.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because as much as we like these 2 individual signings at tight end, this is such a great tight end draft class that it would almost be a bummer to see them just not take a prospect at that position entirely.
No, I think they're absolutely drafting somebody. And I think it'll be someone who is more in that mold of, obviously I'm biased, but I think I don't even think this. I know this because I was calling an Iowa game back in 2022 and someone said it to me from the organization. They felt that Luke Lachey had the higher ceiling in the NFL than Sam Laporta. And Sam Laporta, all he did was set every single rookie tight end record of all time last year in 2023. And so, I know he's going to be there at the top of the 4th round. And I know there's going to be plenty of other similar comparable names there as well. And I think the Jags will have their pick and they'll be able to find that guy to slot in behind Brenton Strange.
I actually did look it up yesterday. Last year in their initial 53-man rosters, the Vikings carried 3 tight ends, the Rams carried 3 tight ends, but Liam Cohen's Buccaneers did carry 4 tight ends. So that is obviously a possibility, especially with what you're telling us now. I gave Hunter Long a C plus, as you mentioned originally, but now I think I would change it to potentially a B plus, especially after having conversations with our good friend John Shipley, because I think that Long is like arguably as good of a blocker as Munt, but he has a much higher ceiling or much more potential as a pass catcher. I think he only had like one catch in his first 3 years at Miami, but then he had a few more last year with the Rams. And I think that I would assume that this is a James Gladstone guy, because I think that a lot of times in NFL front offices, when you're doing pro free agency, you often look back to like what your draft grades were and what you thought of players when they were coming out of college. And so the fact that Hunter Long was traded to Gladstone's Rams as part of the Jalen Ramsey deal about 2 years ago, and then he's now following Gladstone to Los Angeles to Jacksonville, makes me think that Gladstone has always loved this guy. He was originally a third-round pick out of Boston College. So, yeah, excited about Hunter Long. Next name on our list is wide receiver Diami Brown from the Commanders. He signed a one-year, $12 million contract with $10 million guaranteed. So, Mia, what do you think about the one-year flyer on Brown?
Well, you gave this a B on 1010XL.com, Gus, and that's in large part because Diami Brown was your guy. He was who you identified as, all right, if you're going to bring in a speedster opposite Brian Thomas Jr. or opposite Gabe Davis, if you may, at that X, who is it going to be? I agree. I probably put it at a B minus. I think that's solely because I've been here at the Players Championship and Hayes Carlyon and his questions about Diami Brown being a one-hit wonder and where was the production earlier in his career. I think that's rubbing off onto me. But ultimately for me, if the Kansas City Chiefs, and I know it didn't work out, but ultimately if the Kansas City Chiefs can go out and say, we're going to sign Hollywood Brown to a one-year deal to give us that X speedy threat on the outside, why can't the Jacksonville Jaguars? And so for me, I think it's a smart move because ultimately I also think the Jaguars are going to draft not necessarily that XY receiver unless he presents himself in this year's NFL draft, but this is a placeholder for 2026 where if they are able to fill many of the holes in this year's crop, then that's the year where they go back to a first, second round wide receiver and bring in that speed demon.
I think I would have given this a much lower grade if it was more than 1 year. And obviously there's a little bit of risk because it's like hypothetically Diami Brown could be great and then you only had him for the 1 year and you would have to either break the bank to potentially like re-sign him in 2026 or just be kind of forced to move on from him. But obviously that would be a good problem to have. So I think that the 1 year is a good deal considering how kind of up and down his production in his first 4 years of his career were in Washington. At the same time, 3 of those 4 years were with Dan Snyder's Commanders. And so I wonder if he's the kind of guy that just, if he gets into a better system, because obviously he did a lot better in Cliff Kingsbury's scheme last year. So I wonder if he gets into the right environment, then he could really thrive. I think he had really a lot of fans coming out of college at Virginia. So, yeah, let's move on to Patrick Mekari, who is from the Baltimore Ravens, an 8-year veteran, signed a 3-year deal for $37.5 million with $20 million guaranteed. He played a bunch of different spots across the offensive line in Baltimore, so he's got versatility, but he is expected to be the week 1 starter at right guard, I'd presume, in Jacksonville in 2025. Mia, what are your thoughts on Mekari?
Yep, you gave this one a B. Mekari, I believe. We'll figure out more when select free agents are going to meet with the Jacksonville Jaguars media later on today. And so hopefully we'll get more intel on how to pronounce his last name. But no, this one for me, it's probably the best signing of the bunch. It's a B+. This is, if you want to talk about raising the floor, this is raising the floor. Blake Hance signed with the Tennessee Titans earlier this week, and that was your guy who could play all 5 positions. Now you're bringing in someone who started all 17 games plus a postseason run last year, started in an AFC championship game the year prior. I know there's concerns because he's played the last 2 years. The majority of his snaps have been at right tackle. The sneaky connection that I made on Helmets and Heels that I know stunned a couple of the gals as well as Coach Campo, who was the assistant offensive line coach in Baltimore when Patrick Mekari signed as an undrafted free agent in 2019.
I don't even have a guess. Who was it?
Richard Angulo, the tight ends coach for your Jacksonville Jaguars.
I should have known that one. I knew that Richard was in Baltimore.
File that one away, folks. File that one away. Yeah, this is the best signing because he can play anywhere. Just for the sake of time, let's run through a couple of the other offensive line signings, Gus. I know you gave the Chuma Edoga a C+. That's probably for me. We'll get to the Eric Murray conversation last. I know Jason in the chat asked about Eric Murray. We'll get to him after these offensive line guys. That one for me was a little puzzling. I'd probably give it a C, but I think that's about creating competition at that swing tackle position. That says to me that as much as they tendered Cole Van Lannon, maybe they're not as sold on the former Green Bay Packer and former Wisconsin product. It also says to me they are certainly not sold on Javon Foster, the 4th-round pick from a year ago, which quite frankly, I'm not either. And from what I heard in the building, I don't think the people that remain from last year are as well. And so I get it. You want competition, but for me, I wouldn't be surprised if that's either a 1-year stop or a camp body. It's fine. A 2-year deal is kind of weird to me, but whatever. And then as far as Robert Hainsey, again, so much of free agency in this day and age, Gus, is about ensuring that you go into the NFL draft and you could say, we can line up right now with these guys that are already on the roster. You don't show your hand and you have leverage. I still believe the Jaguars will be drafting their center of the future in April's NFL draft. However, having Robert Hainsey allows for, if let's say, much like the Rams did last year, they selected Bo Limmer in the 6th round. They never expected him to be their starting center, but because of injuries, he was thrust into duty. By the way, the former regime here in Jacksonville had a 5th-round grade on Bo Limmer, so also file that one away, folks. And so that is where I look at this and I say maybe Robert Hainsey starts week 1, but ultimately you are giving yourself an opportunity to develop that future center as opposed to thrusting Luke Fortner into action right away like the Jaguars had to do in 2022.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I think Chuma Edoga, that deal grew on me because it was announced that there's only $3.2 million guaranteed on his contract. So I feel like that's essentially like a 1-year kind of prove it deal. And if the team ends up liking him, then he can stick around for even cheaper in 2026. But definitely makes sense to bring in competition at swing tackle against Javon Foster. And then in terms of Hainsey, I think I totally agree with all that, what you said. Like, you fill needs in free agency so you can draft for wants in the draft. And I certainly expect the Jaguars to still draft potentially future starting center in April. But it is interesting to me that Hainsey got a 3-year deal with $13 million guaranteed, which I don't think necessarily means like, oh, he will be starting for the duration of his contract. But that is just a little bit more pricier than I expected. They didn't really get the familiarity discount of him following Liam Cohen over. But I will say that even though Hainsey was benched and the Bucs drafted Graham Barton in the 1st round last year to replace him at center, he did seem to do a lot better in limited snaps last year in Cohen's scheme. And I think if Cohen said he wanted him, even despite his on the field play in 2022 and 2023, then I would probably trust that more than what I'm looking at film myself. So I don't mind that, especially since the center market in free agency was really not good. I would rather give Hainsey this deal than the Bears giving Drew Dahman what they gave him.
Amen to that, Gus. Amen to that. And also, like, Graham Barton is going to be a top 5, top 3 center in the league this year. Like, enough with the, like, our rookie beat him out. Well, yeah, the reason that so many teams are going to try to draft Gray Zabel in the 1st round this year is because of what Graham Barton did. So, like, enough with the, you signed the backup. Like, relax. He was a starter literally under center for Tom Brady. Please.
Yeah. Graham Barton was like my early draft crush. I remember in like November of 23, I was like, Graham Barton, let's do it. But the Jaguars obviously weren't really in a good slot to get him. But let's move on to our 9th free agent that the Jacksonville Jaguars have agreed to terms with. Eric Murray, safety from the division rival Houston Texans. He signed a 3-year deal worth $22.5 million with $12 million guaranteed. I give this one a C-, the lowest grade that I've given out. Mia, what think you?
C- for me as well. Again, I want to be optimistic, but the first text I got from a colleague in Houston was enjoying blown coverage and inconsistent angles to the ball carrier, to which I replied, so it's Andre Sisco all over again. And the response was, the good news is that Andre Sisco may end up being better next season, depending on the system he's in. Eric Murray is Kirkland brand Kirk Cousins of secondary players. Which for me, that's all you need right now. Because again, the hope is that you're going to draft the guy who's going to be your long-term starter there. At the end of the day, this is a guy who's played in the league for almost a decade. He has snaps he has skins on the wall. And that is what you need in a secondary and in a safety room that, well, yes, it has Dewey Wingard and Daniel Thomas. It has been lacking in terms of a veteran voice outside of those two guys who obviously are very vocal, but haven't necessarily started in playoff games outside of 2022, 2023. Mm-hmm. So that's where, again, for me, Yeah, Barry Church, Jason, that's a great comp, I think, in my estimation personally. And the deal itself was a little, I mean, I was shocked it was 3 years. If it was a 2-year deal, I think I'm giving this a B minus C plus, because then it's just a placeholder and you probably get out from underneath it in a year. I think as is, you'll get out from it in 2. Real quick, Gus, because since I do have to run, Ermelindo Garzone asked about the Cooper Kupp news. Would he be a Jaguar? Obviously, the betting market suggests he will be. I will tell you this. Unless he is taking the vet minimum, I do not believe Cooper Kupp will be in Jacksonville. I think that he has a hot market. I believe there are teams that are willing to pay him in, what would that be, the 7-figure, 8-figure count, like whatever, like more than $10 million a year, like a Diami Brown contract. I don't think the Jaguars will go above that.
Well, I'd love to make a Star Wars joke, but I know we don't have the time. And Mia, you got to get out of here, so I'll let you go. We'll be back. I'll be back at 9:04 a.m. tomorrow with Hacker to talk more free agency. Make sure to try to check us out at TPC, the players, if you're out there. Hope everyone has a good one. Mia, thanks as always.
Bye, friends.
Everyone. Peace.